a Saudi, rich Saudi, to establish himself on their territory, where he trained thousands of terrorists. That, of course, was Bin Laden. He didn't care at all about the normal precepts of tolerance and looking after women and children and so on. But the Taliban gave him a home, and no doubt he gave them some money.
Then, on September the 9th, 2001, in what appears to have been a preemptive strike against the Northern Alliance, Massoud was assassinated by Al-Qaeda.
Suicide bombers posing as cameramen, and the bomb was either in the camera or in a belt round the cameraman's waist. Nobody quite knows, nobody's sure which. We stayed in the guest house in this last visit, where they spent a month waiting to interview Massoud, and when they did, they blew themselves and him up.
Martyr Massoud spent most of his life fighting for the freedom of Afghanistan. He fought against communism, afterwards against terrorism, and he sacrificed himself for his people.
2 days after his assassination, Al-Qaeda struck again. American revenge, when it came, was decisive, bombing the Taliban and Al-Qaeda out of Kabul and out of power.
He must have realized, maybe the Taliban realized, that the world would retaliate, and would retaliate against his Afghan hosts. The Muslims accept the idea that if you do something bad, there is an idea of revenge and retaliation. So it was understandable that the Americans and the West would then want to invade Afghanistan. Unfortunately, they were able to do so partly because the Northern Alliance, although weak, was still in existence. And that's why the American and Western coalition forces were able, with the Northern Alliance, to throw the Taliban out. And the people were glad to get rid of them. And Bin Laden was chased out of his lairs and his caves. But of course, he's still alive. He's still somewhere.
Since the overthrow of the Taliban, Afghanistan has really been opened up. There was an amazing sense of freedom when they were ousted from power. And it meant that a lot of the restrictions and the difficult working practices ended. But it also meant that people could go there.
My experience of the war and the huge number of casualties caused by mines, many of them children, led me to start Sandy Gall's Afghanistan Appeal. Since 1986, we've provided artificial limbs and appliances to more than 20,000 patients and physiotherapy for about 50,000. With much work still to be done, more than 20 years after my first visit to Afghanistan, I retraced my original journey. But this time it was on behalf of my appeal on a sponsored walk up the Panjshir Valley to raise money for the charity.
One of the committee members came up with the idea to do a fundraising walk, and we thought what a unique place to do it in, and we were sure there would be lots of kind of robust people who wouldn't mind walking and camping up the Panjshir Valley. So we took a sponsored walk last September of 24 walkers, and the idea was that they should see some of the work being done in 2 of the clinics in Kabul, and then spend 10 days doing this 100-mile hike up the Panjshir Valley.
I hadn't intended to go back, but I found the invitation quite irresistible. First of all, the Panjshir Valley is staggeringly beautiful. It runs from 7,000 feet up, locked high in the Hindu Kush Mountains. So it was very tempting to go back. And secondly, the actual charity itself, which is for providing prostheses for mainly children and often women who had stepped on mines in the course of their work and blown their feet off. It's a wonderful cause. And on one occasion I was ahead of the walk, came into a village, and there was a wire bridge, and there was a young man making his way across like an acrobat, hand over hand, and as I approached, he dropped to the ground and came limping towards us.
A young man came up and with great pride showed that he in fact had a baloney prosthesis provided by Sandy Gall.
A little knot of villagers appeared around us and immediately invited us to tea. And as Sandy came along, a little cry went up of Sandy Gall, Sandy Gall. I can tell you, that gave me a lump in the throat.
It was amazing for people to see patients being treated, the sort of children with problems and disabled, and just people they met in the Panjshir, and just what people's lives are like.
The service that SGA provides is really essential, because very sadly the government health service in Afghanistan were largely destroyed. Many of the doctors left. In fact, when I first went to Jalalabad, there was no orthopedic surgeon at all, and the general surgeons were having to cope with the orthopedic problems. Basically, the SGA in the northeast of Afghanistan provides a major service, not just for artificial limbs, but also for splints, and for, of course, the physiotherapy, which is essential to teach people how to use these devices.
America's strategy is to unite the patchwork of squabbling warlords under President Karzai and to give him the means and the money to do the job which history has shown cannot be done by outsiders.
You've got to make the Afghans do it themselves, because everybody who's tried in the past to interfere with them or change their course has failed. The one thing that unites them is the presence of a foreigner, and there's got to be a way of dealing with Afghanistan without exciting that terrific natural xenophobia.
The most important lesson from the Afghan history can be, come there as friends, not conquerors. People can trust you if they think you have good intentions.
And I mean, I think that lesson was proved in the 19th century with the British, in the 20th century with the Russians, and is now being proved in the 21st century with the Americans.
It's important to know one's history and to understand the history. Britain has a long history. Afghanistan has a much longer and more convoluted and intricate history.
Afghanistan doesn't need statements. Afghanistan needs soldiers, money, and real determination to make it stable.
It is a message that Afghans have tried to impress on the West many times, perhaps none more tellingly than the assassinated Mujahideen leader Ahmad Shah Massoud over 20 years ago.
The responsibility for this will lie on the shoulders of the present leaders of the West. Today they have the power, but they are idly sitting by and watching what the Russians are doing in Afghanistan. They content themselves with words, but they've done nothing so far. The responsibility for what happens in the future rests with them, and one day they will have to answer to their own people.
Will President Karzai succeed despite the fanatical opposition of a resurgent Taliban supported by Al-Qaeda and fundamentalist groups in Pakistan? For the past 2,000 years, Afghans have suffered wars and devastation. The past 20 years have been especially grim. But there have also been periods of great cultural renaissance. Today, I believe, Afghans face the possibility of a real revival. History proves that that may be possible again.